Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Transformed You. Mark DeJesus here, along with my amazing wife, Melissa.
Hello.
It's good to see you all here today. We're continuing the subject of healing from toxic relationships, and we're hoping we can land this plane a bit to talk a bit about the aftermath. After you have left a toxic relationship, a toxic environment, a toxic group. We've talked about many different aspects. And what we want to focus in on is, okay, you've moved on. You've seen the toxicity and you've realized I've had to move on from this. Now what? What does it look like? And this is going to take some practical advice and some areas that I think would be important to focus on. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of our learning journey of the things we've been through and kind of look back and go, what are the keys that were needed in aspects of our journey? Mm-hmm. We're also going to look at all the people we've helped over the years, all the situations we've worked through, and what's helpful in that. And we pray that you'll find yourself in your journey and some help for your own life and what you're going through. We're also going to, after this episode airs, we're planning on at some point doing 2 episodes for Q&A, at least 2 episodes, depending on how many questions come in. So after you've gone through episode 1 of this season all the way up till now, and there are situations or questions you'd like to submit, feel free to send them in. We'll consider them. We'll consider addressing them, and we do plan on doing those shows live. And those who can't make the live episode, you can still watch it and take in. I love taking in questions. I love hearing other people.
You do so good with the questions.
Well, I love hearing other people ask questions. I go, oh, yeah, I wonder what they're going to say about that. So before we get into today's episode, if anything we talk about, if anything we share with you has made a difference in your life and journey, go to markdejesus.com. Join our newsletter. You'll get updates on weekly articles, videos, podcast episodes. We have books and materials. Our latest book is The Heart Healing Journey, which gets a lot into what does it look like to day by day have a heart that is ready, open, and teachable to what God has for you at each stage in this journey. It gets into a lot of subjects, like even touches on trauma and memories and what does it look like to begin the process and to start experiencing awakening, healing, and transformation in your life. So again, consider a one-time donation. Consider becoming a regular supporter. You can donate any amount on a monthly basis, or you can also choose our transformational tribe pathways, which those give you access to some video training, audio training materials that are available and that are there. So get into the aftermath. It's like a strong word, like the aftermath of it all. And when we look at this, there's so many different situations, so many different things. And I'll look at, all right, what are some of the things that we've learned? Where do we kind of begin with this? What's something that would be so helpful to begin in looking at, all right, with all that we've learned, with everything that we've seen, what's going to really help this process? What's really going to help the healing?
Well, we hate to use the old adage of time heals all wounds. Time is super important, though. And I don't, there has to be a word added to that time, and I think it needs to be intentional. There were so many times that we were going through a healing process after removing ourselves or whatever it looked like out of toxic situations. And for me, you and I handle pain in different ways. I am very boisterous and outward, and I get all worked up and I got to talk about it, like in a boisterous, crazy way. I don't want to say crazy, but like a lot of women do. We're very
I understand
vocal.
What you mean, yeah.
You do talk about things, but you're different in how you process it, which I wish I had. Like you have a lot of like more.
Well, it can also, my way of approaching pain will be often to take that pain energy and use it towards, okay, I'm going to push into this next thing, or I'm going to put my energy here. Some of that can be very fruitful. A lot of that can also be a form of denial. It could be, so I can be along the path and I'm like feeling like I'm doing okay. And then I'm like, why am I having all these, symptoms? Why do I feel anxiety all of a sudden all the time? And I'm having a hard time connecting it to what's going on under the surface. And it's revealing that I didn't give some room and time for that because it's uncomfortable. This time, you said before we clicked record, you said the key is going to really be intentional time, not just time. Time doesn't heal. It's intentional time that heals, because people could say, well, this happened 30 years ago, and they're not able to talk about it. When they do talk about it, it gets very toxic at times in how they're expressing from a toxic relationship, right? So there's symptoms we need to be aware of that we're not handling it well, and that's all right. But I think that if I was to look back, okay, so let's kind of look back at a couple questions. Maybe 20 years ago, Melissa, what would you say to her as far as time? What would you say to her as far as, the healing process of what you needed at that stage in your life 20 years ago?
Right. Well, I think within how I responded to things, I always created such chaos, and I kept the pain constantly going. I did not know how to kind of sit. I would give myself advice of, number one, finding healthier people to talk to, whether that was a counselor or somebody healthier to talk to. Because I didn't have any good coping skills. It was, I kind of thought, I guess, I don't know, I shouldn't say I thought I was okay, but because I could look at a situation and call it out and get worked up and this is wrong and point out how wrong everything was, that I guess I thought I was okay. And really I wasn't giving my heart a break. I wasn't being intentional to recognize that you're in pain. You're in pain and you've been hurt.
Right.
And giving that space to then be able to say, well, how did I contribute to this? Because I don't think you can fully look at yourself either.
Wow.
On, wait, what did I contribute to this situation? Why was I in it? Why was I drawn to it? And that's a journey to get to. That takes maturity to be able to, with sobriety.
Takes a lot to recognize
look at the pain.
That.
Yeah, because we don't do that. We make everybody, every situation, everything else, the demon. We demonize.
Yeah, because doesn't shame cover so much of our pain? So what shame does is shame will often react in blame. So we villainize a person, and we're not saying what they did wasn't wrong, but what we do is we villainize someone else, and it doesn't allow us to then just look at our own journey with healthier eyes. And many people don't know how to take that, because they'll say, well, then you're telling me it's my fault. No, that's a shame response.
Correct.
When you get free from shame, it's no longer about anyone's fault. It's now about, how do I heal? Now, at first, you kind of need that. I feel like you need a little bit of that boost, of that irritation, of that, like, this is dysfunctional, to get you out.
Right.
I don't hear anybody like say it like this, but it's just reality. I think it's like sometimes that like anger of this is so dysfunctional kind of needs to help you to make that decision to get out. But love is really what's going to help you to sustain the journey. But sometimes we need that, like, enough. I'm tired of this. And you make a decision out of that, like, enough is enough. But then we're like, yeah, that church or that business or that guy. And we villainize. Be careful that doesn't become the permanent thing, because then I meet people, they've been divorced for 30 years. And they're saying statements of like, yeah, he's still alive. Like, whoa.
And they can recall like a Rolodex what that person did to them.
That was 30 years ago. That's a sign of not working through the healing. It's a sign that shame's still there. When shame gets into the narrative, you're not going to heal effectively, right? So in the aftermath, if I was to look back, I think there was a lot of shame I felt over my life and over my journey at different stages. Like when we left the first church, when we got married and left, took a huge step in that, and even people to this day go, man, when you talk about that, like makes me nervous hearing you tell the story.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
And looking back, we're like, wow, that was a drastic step.
It was bold.
It was bold, but we needed to. I think that I realized I carried a lot of shame in it because the next step didn't open up quickly. So I carried a lot of, did I do something wrong? What did I do wrong? Let me figure out what I did wrong. And actually, it was nothing about it was about anything wrong. It was now I need to enter the journey of healing, but the journey of who I am, the journey of the new things. Like, I had to really let that unfold. And I don't know that even if somebody had told me at that time, here's what you need, I would have been like, yeah, but what's the thing I need to like fix?
Right.
This obsessiveness would kick in. And I think that you said something that I think is important, but that's the hard stuff. There's some people that may hear this section and just tune right out because they're like, how dare you say what I need to work on about me? And I think being able to look at yourself in kindness and go, yeah, there's times where I look back and I go, yeah, I wasn't safe in that moment. I wasn't safe in that moment. And I could easily blame this person. But you know what? I made some decisions too, and I'm learning. So time needs to be a part of it with intention. So like intention meaning that I'm going to work on some things. I'm going to give space, but it needs kindness.
Right.
It needs the power of God's loving nurture, and it will take longer than you think it will take, way longer. So take how long you think it's going to take, double it, maybe triple it. And that's just a start. And for many people, they go, that's too long. They go back to their world. And I'm like, that's fine. But years down the road, you're going to see symptoms, and you're going to be in somebody's office, and they're going to go, yeah, it was from back at that time. And so if you're willing and able to hear, okay, I got some things I got to work on, and I got some things but it has to all be done in the atmosphere of kindness. Otherwise, the devil will get in, the enemy will get in, accuse you, shame you, guilt you. Then you'll start blaming others. You'll blame yourself. You'll blame God. So I had to let go of the blame, the blame game, the world of blaming, because once I
loved the blame game. I was so good at it. I was a professional.
Yeah, because it distracts you from what you really need to heal from.
Yeah, because even when I'll use an example from my own life of years ago, and I've shared this in earlier podcasts. I had a relationship with someone who had a drug problem, and he wooed me in and sucked me into his life and poured love on me, which I hadn't received from a man in that way, And so it was like magical. And then the whammy came. Well, by then I'm already hook, line, and sinker. So now I'm invested. So I spent years, and it was always, well, if he could just get right, Now, there was a lot of that could be true, and I could say it could be true. But deep down, as I got rid of that relationship and got sobriety about why I was in relationship with him, then I looked at, well, it's my dad's fault. My dad didn't give me... Still, okay, yes, there's a layer of that, why I entered into that, but I still had to deal with, that shame piece is so big, but why I didn't love myself enough to say enough and leave. That was a big aspect of being involved in a severely toxic relationship like that, and understanding how I perceived love and what love looks like. And that can go to, a relationship, it can go to church, it can go to family, it can go to friendships, all kinds of things of what we endure, because that lens of love, you turn that notch just a little bit to the side. So it looks like love, kind of goes to our whole occult stuff from last week of the occlusion of what true light and true love is, right? Yeah. It looks like it in a way, but you just turn that notch a little. Man, it can send you on a spiral for years if we're not rooted properly in what really loving, kind relationships are. So anyways,
there was something that I just thought of as you were sharing that in my journey, and a lot of people I see, when you come out of a toxic relationship of any kind, group, person, marriage, whatever, there is this driving force of getting your story out there. I don't mean just like on Facebook, although that's a part of it, or social media. I mean like when you're around friends and people, there becomes a driving compulsion, whether it's compulsion, impulsion, whatever. There's this thing that you feel like you got to get your story because there's a need for you to feel validated about your side and your reasoning. So if I was to look back, it would be seeing that with greater kindness of there's almost a addictive kind of push to get the story. Do you know what happened? I got to tell you what happened.
Oh, I was the queenie of that.
And we focus on
it's hard not to do.
Don't gossip. Gossiping's bad. And you're gossiping, right? And I don't know that it's that black and white, because we have to be able to process our journey. You got to be able to get it out so someone else can look at it. The problem is that we do it with a bunch of friends, or we do it with acquaintances, or we'll do it to whoever will listen, and we don't have wisdom in the moment because our brokenness just drives our need to like share the story and share the thing. And then we end up sharing it with people we probably shouldn't
share it with, right? That's the truth.
Then you
feel yucky.
Yeah. So when you get out of a toxic situation, one, you really need to get away from it. And when I say get away from it, you need to get away from it in every form. You need to realize it's time to start over. So if, friends, acquaintances, relationship, you may need to move geographically depending on your situation. If you leave a church and you're still in that same vicinity and you're seeing each other at the grocery store, and it's like, I get that. I've seen that. I've watched it. I've experienced it.
You get re-traumatized over and over and over, right?
Right. And it's not honoring to your journey, because then you feel like you got to
tell the story.
and then you feel like, well, I want to be forgiving, and I don't want to let fear ruin my life. And then you're walking down the aisle of, Target, and you're like, or you're going to pump gas in the car, and you're like, oh, here goes this awkward interaction. Yeah. You have to respect the tenderness of where you're at in that stage. So with that in mind, you need to we talk about intentional time. You need to find people that are highly skilled in these kind of things. And usually it involves a counselor. It involves somebody who is very well versed in these kind of battlegrounds, who has nothing to do and doesn't know anything about. I think that's important, because there were times where I would look for the help, and the person knew this, knew that, knew this and that. And it was like, it was the best I could get at the time, but it would really have helped.
Soils the water a bit. Yeah.
I find that somebody who has like no connection at all, because here's what's important. It's not just getting the story out. It's also allowing the mirror to come up, right? So I think this is the cornerstone of mental health that's not always really talked about, is that I need to submit what I'm feeling and going through to someone who's safe, but in the process, allow the nurturing feedback to come back where it's like, oh, all right, I need to adjust that part of my story, because my story is stuck. There's certain places where my story is stuck, and it's leading me to a victim place. And now I have no progress forward. And I've got the story down pat, because I had areas where I had the story down pat. It was almost like I could it's like you hit that track on the song, hit play. And whenever that area of my life would get touched in conversation, it's like, yeah, and on the next 15 minutes on my story. And it's okay if we do that, but I had to realize, wow, the track is on repeat and it's not productive. And so I think people don't realize that you need time, you need safety, kindness, you need voices into it. You may need to make major changes. You may need to move. You may need to make a geographical move. You may need to overhaul your friendships. You may need to, and that's the arena that I think that gets really tricky, but those things pull you back in, because it's not just, I'm thinking of like, breaking up with the abusive boyfriend. It's not just like the moment where you go, we're done. That's the first decision. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to say we're done probably 50 more times, to yourself, probably to him when he calls, texts, sees you, or talks to your friend, the friend talks to you. So healing involves like a series of decisions that we make in new directions, right? To guard our space and our safety. And we learn that after a while.
Yeah.
We learned that after a while of like, you know what? Can't do it. There'd be people from old areas or old groups. and want to kind of pull in the stories. And it's like, nah, we're not doing that anymore.
Well, really, it's the word detox,
Yeah.
Whether it's an actual drug addiction, because usually if you're involved in any kind of a toxic relationship, there is an addiction type aspect to the relationship that you were part of with the person. I know that I could say that about several friendships I had. There was a codependent, addictive behavior I had to in interacting with them because rejection was in play most of the time. Mm-hmm. Constant rejection.
Yeah. Is that a recommended place of inner work? Is that like when you leave, it's like, all right, I gotta
150%. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exposing the rejection mindset. So people have written in already saying, where do I begin in these kind of things? It's one aspect to realize, because rejection is at the root system of every place where you've not been loved properly. It's going to come in, and it's going to create mindsets and disempowering ways. So it's important to realize, to recognize that. I think tailing off of this rejection subject. So whenever we have a wound, rejection comes in, right? Some people, they just like spiral, right, without any productive healing. Other people go into high performance mode. Mm-hmm. So if I was to look back at a couple stages we've been in, I in the change felt like I had to okay, what's next? What do I got to do next?
Yeah, you were the performer and I spiraled. Don't
right.
you think that would be, yeah. I went one way and you went the other way.
You were I was the performer, you spiral, I would perform and then spiral. So right. I just had a longer way to get.
We were quite the little crew.
Yeah.
Oh,
and,
boy.
And really in those seasons, because there's a number of seasons I look at, it was like I needed the wisdom of, you don't have to do anything right now. Like why? And I think if I look at 06, where we started a new ministry, from scratch, I think wisdom in the learning, it's not like, oh, what we did was wrong and I got to go back. I can look at it now with different eyes to go, oh, I could have just, not done any of those things I did, given my time to discover, yeah, but finances and this and that, listen, the finances were tough no matter what. Right. So I might as well use the time to really discover some things. And instead I was under constant pressure, daily, and then it didn't help the healing process. So it took me much, much longer to heal because I had so many other things in new drama. And I think what I needed was, it's going to take longer than you think. And it's okay. You're not out of God's plan. You're not missing something. You're not missing the boat. This is exactly for you.
So I want to ask this question to you in a clear way. So you may have to help in because I know you're going to know where I'm going with it. What do you think the outcome would have been for us when we were exiting the church, making the decisions we were making? If you had grown up in a home where your dad, because he's a great guy, don't get me wrong, but all of our parents went through their own stuff, was someone who gave you wise, peaceful counsel, as opposed to not having that. What do you think the difference? Because at the end of the day, we still, even if you ultimately grew up with great parents, you still have to go through stuff. But what do you think it would have looked like if you knew how to access, what Proverbs 4 talks about in the instruction of a father and mother and understanding God's nurture and wisdom? What do you think, you can't negate going through things, but what could it have looked like with wisdom? Well, I know that's a big question.
Well, I first say I think I needed to go through what we went through.
We totally did.
To learn what I learned in a good way. I learned so much since those days. I can't even recognize the person I am since those days. But I think there's components of, at that time, I was such in a place where I was feeling such an awakening that I was like, no matter what, I'm moving on. So I think what wisdom could have looked like at that time is, yeah, you're moving on. Let's talk about a plan. maybe that would have been really, let's talk about
that you would have been receptive to hear.
Because we were like very like day to day.
We're on our own, and we're on our own.
And it was like falling off a cliff.
Right.
And it was like, we're starting all over.
Right.
And then we're exhausted. Like we're constantly like just passed out on the couch, like where we go, we're trying to discover new relationships. And then those, we rushed into some of them, and many of them were toxic. And it's like, really when I sit down with somebody who wants to make these kind of faith decisions, I want to leave everything and pursue ministry. Or I want to do this and I want to be an entrepreneur. It's like, I want to validate the zeal because I saw many people squash the zeal. I never want to put a fire out. You never see in the Bible the instruction putting the fire out. In fact, Paul would, to me, a very fiery church was the Church of Corinth. A lot of fire, but they had a lot of issues, a lot of crazy sex, drugs, and rock and rolls kind of stuff going on, right? He's like, whoa, no, don't do that, right? That's an example of fire and passion that just needed some fathering. So it's like, don't want to squash the flame at all, but let's create a plan, like some plans, and give permission. This was the thing I didn't do. I didn't give myself permission to discover who I really am.
Yep.
And flow out of that.
Yep. That's so good.
So I was like, oh, you need an evangelist to do an evangelist meeting? Yes,
I can do it. I can do it good.
I'll do that. I can be that. It's like, why don't I just go, I don't want to do that.
Right. And be okay.
I don't want to do that.
I don't really want to do that.
Because my thing was like, oh, there's something there and I'll miss out if I don't do that. And I think I never knew what that was like. I never knew what that was like to just go, I don't have to answer, no. I don't have to answer that phone call. Right. I don't have to do that date. I don't have to, I can hear it and I don't have to, I can say no. And it's all right. I had no.
That's really good, babe. Yeah.
There's a Christian undercurrent of we kind of say yes to everything because God's in it all and he loves our service unto him.
And if the church is asking you, it must be from God.
Right. So I think that what I do today is just like, let's look at like perspective plan. Let's give you something where you feel like you have some steps, and it's going to be slow movement. It's going to be slower than you think. It's going to take longer than you think. I think that I was in a rush to get started on the new thing, and it was very clear. God was like, we're going to do some identity work. We're going to do some, this is going to be
some cleanup to do.
Yeah, so
take a seat. We got some cleanup to do.
So I find myself saying something I never thought I would say. I said to you the other day, there are many, many prayers I'm glad.
Yes, we say this a lot.
Were not answered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ain't that the truth?
I never thought I would be saying that, but I'm saying that today.
Yep.
There's a lot of prayers of what I thought I wanted that I go, thank goodness. So with that in mind, I think what I learned and something I share with other people, for the sake of your heart, don't rush into the next thing. Don't rush into the next dating relationship. Don't rush into the next marriage if you had to leave a marriage. Don't rush into the next church. Like if you've been a part of a toxic church, like a toxic faith environment, you're going to need way more time than you ever think to probably not do anything. And people who've been involved in heavy, like cult, spiritually abusive, legalistic environments, that's the thing. So like there were times I had such guilt because I was like, oh, I don't have this fellowship, or I don't have this tribe or this. And it would just once a week, it would just gnaw at me. And what I needed was permission that you don't have to do anything, because the change from abuse and toxicity is a movement out of lack of love, performance legalism, all that stuff, moving into grace, moving into true love, groundedness. Now you're moving into organic steps. So I encourage people, many times people, they'll go through some kind of abusive situation, and then they're quick to blog about it, video about it. And
it's very yucky.
I get very concerned. Whoa, not for any other reason, but I want to guard your healing. This is not, you're still tender right now. I see people up on stages prematurely, and I'm like, no,
Right.
like, no,
This isn't going to end well.
you need time. Like, I know you're, you're a rock star and people love you and love your material, but you need to give it time. I'm not saying you're disqualified. That's not even the subject. It's not even the subject, because people kind of get into that, like, well, it needs to be 2 years. And then it's just, there's really not a stamp for anyone. I think there's a minimum of, like, you need to give it a lot of time. Definitely. I'm not even going to put a specific time. It's not about like being good enough or qualified. Like, I've seen pastors, with their fallouts and in healing process, and they're like, okay, you need this many months and this many time. It's like, well, it might take triple that, and, because it's not just him. It's how he was groomed. It was how he was, encouraged, because the healing is not going to be the same person coming back. So what's that going to look like? So for your journey, I encourage people, don't, like, even when we talked about the subject of spiritual abuse, we took a lot of time to let our journey marinate. Mm-hmm. And it's not like, oh, we're perfectly healed, so now we can talk about it. No. But we got to let the dust settle a little bit. We got to let ourselves ponder, and then God will organically. So what we try to do in our ministry work is we let the subjects organically bubble up. I let it just organically bubble up. I have hundreds and hundreds of things in documents in my files on subjects that are all in what I call marinating, right? They're things I learned and I went, oh, I said, I'm going to let that marinate for a while. And some of them sit for years while I just marinate on them. And then people say, hey, can you talk about that subject? And I'm like, yep.
It'll come.
It's on the burner. Right? It's about 12 burners back. I've got this giant stove, but I'm only working on the pot of mixture of food that's on this stove. That's what I'm stirring up. So even these subjects, this is after many years of us working on us working with situations, most of which we'll never talk about because we're honoring the privacy of what people have gone through. Yeah. That's what makes this tricky, doesn't it? Because we have so much stuff. We're like, oh, this story's a great example, but
man, when my parents eventually die, I have a lot. I don't mean that. I'm just saying. You guys have a sense of humor, or if my parents see this, my mother, I love you, but no.
So I said a lot there.
No, you did, but I was going to add on to that it's so much better when you talk about topics when we have personally gone through them, and we've gotten perspective and we've worked through a lot. Like, to me, that's what I feel very proud of, what people love about us. I think that people can sense the genuine part of who we are, that like we've been through a lot of this stuff and stuff we haven't even shared yet. Like, so just know that we get it. We get how hard it is.
Yeah.
And Mark has the better way. I tend to be more blunt or sarcastic, but that we eloquently talk about these topics. We're not trying to say it's not easy. I mean, that it's not hard, because it is hard and we know it's hard.
Mm-hmm. So let me talk to you about something, and you help me to process it. Because if I was to summarize what has really helped me the most from things that deeply wounded me, toxicity, pain, emptiness, neglect, whatever, friendships, betrayal, if I scan the whole story, there is something that is misunderstood that needs to be a part of the healing journey. And it's the power of true emotional acceptance. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I know that we're going to have to define that a bit. Mm-hmm. Because when I say acceptance, there is, forgive me if I don't even remember what they are, but like there's this thing that's called the pathway of grieving.
Yes.
Right? What are they? The bargaining is like denial, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's
anger,
bargaining,
right?
And then there's this, at the end of it is acceptance. Mm-hmm. There's depression.
Somebody whipped that. They had a card with it all on it one time and showed it to me and was like, "This is what you're going through."
Right.
Do you remember that?
And it was.
I'm like, I didn't think of that.
Well, okay. It was premature for her to
to do that,
to stick that in your face, because it was like you needed to be understood in that moment. But there is truth to that.
Absolutely.
That's what we're Now, what is acceptance? Acceptance is not saying that what anyone did was okay. That's not even
never, ever.
That's not even
right.
Acceptance is not saying you should accept toxic environments. Acceptance is truly coming to terms with what happened. Mm-hmm. So people say, well, what's the sign of that? The sign of that is you could see it for what it is, not worse than what it is. You can see it from multiple perspectives. Mm-hmm. Right?
That's major maturity.
What they did was wrong, but I get how I was misinterpreted. Mm-hmm.
It's why we really, even when we were pastoring, drove home understanding people's stories. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I think back to when we got married and we left the church I was working at. There were certain pains, but also I can understand why they did what they did. How they process things. Look at their history with other leaders they had in the church, other problems they had.
Fears they had.
Some of that they were transferring on me. Mm-hmm. And acceptance was, I get that. Man. Yeah, it's wasn't the best. And then there were further interactions and conversations where even some people I bumped into in leadership there were like, yeah, we wish it didn't go down like that.
Yep.
No, that shows, okay, healing on their end. Still needed to move forward on my journey, my trajectory. There's no changing that. So it's being able to look at broken people and go, yeah, I get why. You start to move into that posture that Jesus had when he got to it quick, because he's on the cross and he goes, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So he came to that posture.
And you want to talk about being in the ultimate pain. Like I get a sliver and I'm out. Like the ultimate experience of pain, and he still was able to forgive.
Yeah, that shows the ultimate place that he lived and walked in.
Unbelievable.
For the joy set before him, the Bible says.
Right.
So, so whatever toxic thing you're going through, many of your symptoms reveal you're still on the journey of acceptance.
Say it again.
Many of the symptoms you have reveal you're on. Okay, so you're still on the journey of accepting. You haven't accepted it yet, and it's not like a clipboard. You haven't accepted, and somebody looking at you with their glasses down. That's not what this is. It's just like, okay, in kindness, because when I finally came to a place of accepting, I see it for what it is. Now I pay attention to what I really need to pay attention to.
I could give an example of that.
I could too.
It's like after we even left the church and we were still in the same area. And I'm thinking, like, I've walked through verbally, heart-wise. I have forgiven. I feel so good. And then I go to the grocery store and I see someone from church and they come up, hey, how you doing? And this thing wells up inside of me to regurgitate out. All of a sudden, I'm telling my side of the story. Mm-hmm. Now I leave, and now I feel yucky, and I'm like, ugh, I still got some rejection to deal with.
Yeah, I struggled.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
I struggled with interactions like that, where afterwards I would beat myself up that I wasn't more confident.
Totally.
That I wasn't more like, why did I go on that weird tangent? Why did I talk about that? And I'd almost look at myself with contempt over it.
Yeah.
And looking back, it was like, no, that you're in a tender space, and it just wasn't a safe moment for you. And you got to be kind to yourself so that you can let it go and go, all right, I'm still healing. So I talk about this a lot in Max's journey. With the most powerful place I've experienced with his journey in autism is really coming to that acceptance that this is where he's at right now. And I thought I did that early on, but it's like this. It goes like this. Yeah, I accept him. So now what? Yeah, I accept. So now what? If you're like, yeah, I accept. So now what? It shows you're not understanding acceptance.
Well, isn't the true level, do you have something you want to finish with? I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
But I want to add to that when it comes to him. And then we can apply this to other situations. Mm-hmm. The true high level is acceptance, but still keeping hope.
Yeah, but when I'm interacting with him,
Right.
I'm no longer trying to change that battle that he has. I'm no longer sitting there with that's the focus. My focus is relating. Now, in the relating, I see where I've chipped away at some things, where I see some improvements in who he is and how he's developing, right? And I credit that to, because sometimes we equate acceptance as this will never change. I think there is an aspect to that, though, that is true, that you need to be okay.
If it doesn't, right.
It's this weird dynamic.
It totally is.
So when people say, acceptance, no, because I'm gonna keep fighting, it doesn't mean you're not fighting. I'm gonna give you the perfect example. Perfect example. Jesus goes to the funeral of Lazarus, and Lazarus is dead. He dead.
He gone.
Right? Lazarus is dead. So Jesus, there's so much in this story I could talk for hours about. Jesus shows up a few days late. What was it, like 4 days late, I think? Shows up late. So that's already
an ish.
Like, yeah, like, dude, can you imagine? You can't be 4 days late to a funeral because everyone will be gone. They're like 25 funerals later if you go to a funeral home, right? He shows up late, and the people are throwing the guilt on him. If you were here, this would happen, right? He goes up to the tomb. Now, let me fast forward for a second. Let's pause. He's going to raise him from the dead in about, I don't know how long, but it's going to be a few minutes probably. He does not enter the funeral and go, hey, everybody. Because if I had resurrection power flowing like that, we're at funerals.
Be like, boom, I'm here, yo.
Like, weep not, thou people. He's talking in the King James.
Right.
Weepest not thou over this? For thine redemption draweth nigh.
That's good. That's
right?
Good. That's good.
Jesus looks at the tomb, and the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:45, I think, digging back into my Sunday school days, he wept. Jesus wept. He didn't cry. He wept. Specific language used there. And that's the power of what we're talking about here. Because when you truly grieve and process through the emotions and come to that landing place of accepting of this is where things are currently at and relate to the humanity of that. Jesus, see, we're not these just supernatural beings floating over earth. We are in it. We're not of it, but we're in it. And there's a humanity to what we're going through that God sees, feels. And Jesus reveals that connection to that. So in that, he connects to the pain of what's happening. So in your healing process, if you can just keep allowing the dust to settle, it's okay that I'm not okay is a statement that I encourage people to use. It's okay that I'm off. And I accept this is what happened. This is what I went through. I've submitted it to some people that are giving me healthy feedback. I've given myself room and space that, I talked it out too much with those people, and I probably shouldn't have. It's all right. I was just injured, and be kind to myself. And then it's kind of like, now what? Because when the acceptance comes in, you pay attention to what you need to pay attention to. So if I was to use the illustration of Max, I pay attention to when I'm with him, what do I need to be mindful of? And I start to have just these few things that I now create bond with him, and out of the bond. Now that's a parenting example. But if like I'm healing from a toxic relationship, the thing that is so awkward is that emptiness, right? You leave and it's like, so you want to fix that emptiness with an addiction or with something, and you want to rush to the next thing. And really you just need to let yourself feel it, to allow yourself to land in some of those lonely moments. I think we're so afraid of loneliness. We don't know what to do with it. And just lean into it, because the power of acceptance will let you see it for what it is. It's not about my fault, their fault, anyone's fault. It was just painful. And God, I can look at it now. So now what? And many times God would say, I just focus on this. Oh, okay, really? That's it? I don't have to do those 17 other things? Nope, just this. And now it gives me space and room to heal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Because I think to get to the next level of maturity that can come in, I'm responsible for how I move forward. I take responsibility for where I'm at. And all those other things need to be worked through, because that's the higher level of like, I have control of where I'm going to go now. I have control of how and who I'm going to interact and what my decision making is.
Right.
And I think for the majority of people, we feel very helpless and underneath it all.
Yeah, it's very true.
It was very important for me to make that switch in my mind. Oh, I have power to choose?
Yeah. You're describing the healing from victim thinking.
Right.
Which it takes some time to come out of that. It's not a snap your fingers thing. Even forgiveness. Like we talk, like many times in Christianity, it gets, when it does get talked about, it's like this, you need to forgive. You need to forgive. That's the problem. Forgive. And then I realized that you could religiously do the act and think you did it.
Right. Like I said about the church. I'm forgiving, and thinking I'm amazing. And then all of a sudden I'm confronted with it and it's like oozing out of me like a slime.
Yeah. So this is kind of like this thought's bubbling up as I'm talking right now. And I'm scanning back to many times in coaching, people say, I know I need to forgive. And I will go, don't worry about forgiveness right now. We're just getting started. And I find when we can cultivate an environment of kindness and grace, they're kinder to themselves and they give to others what they're cultivating in themselves. Because when you come out of trauma and, toxic, dramatic, drama-filled, I should say, it's kind of scenarios, really you're hard on yourself. And I realized when I let kindness and patience and self-acceptance flow, now I give that to you. Now I give that to them. Now I see them through that. And I would watch the forgiveness start to just flow like a river. Whereas many times we're like, you need to say the prayer to forgive them. You need to forgive them or else the tormentor will come. True. But we're big on following the grace, which means what's the theme? What's the thing God is seeming to highlight right now? If it is forgiveness, and let's dig right down and we're going to tunnel down into that and we're going to see beautiful things happen. But it's like, don't force something just because it's a concept out there. I need someone to pray and do this thing because we look to all these like mechanics,
right.
and it really derails us from going, no, it's just going to take time. And for that person, this was their key. For you, it may be this key over here. But the theme in it all, if we want to be helpful, is the goodness of God needs to be received. Well, I don't know if where God is, I feel disconnected to him. I feel like God caused it. I feel like God wasn't even there. There we go. There we go. So that's why I spend a lot of time just helping people to heal and recover and reestablish what's your God lens. Because that needs to be taught and structured because that's at the root system of how we approach things. We can't even grieve because we don't see the God of goodness in the journey.
Right.
So
true. Would you agree with the statement that a one good sign that you're moving towards healing, you've worked on healing, and the aftermath of being involved in toxicity is that you can talk about it freely with a love perspective about it?
Yeah, I would say that's right on, but I also don't want to accuse people that can't feel that. If you feel like you can't talk about it fruitfully, give yourself permission for a journey.
Correct. Absolutely.
Because there were certain things I couldn't talk about without it producing anxiety for first and foremost.
Absolutely.
So what I did was I would avoid it. Like, I don't want to talk about that because it's just going to make me all knotted up and I don't have to chase it. Okay, anxiety, we're going to, But when it organically comes up, I developed a new response. All right, it's my time to face this. It's my time because it's good for me. It's good for me to face this. It's been a very good thing in my mental health healing and maturing. At times allowing, when I'm working with someone who's helping me, or even just talking with someone I trust, and something said back, to allow that to give me an invitation to challenge my story a little bit. When I mean challenge, I don't mean like, kind of like their finger pointed at you. But like, hey, maybe,
Perspective.
To adjust the perspective a little bit, because all our stories, I talk about the story you carry a lot. The biblical word is testimony. What's the testimony you carry? We can carry a testimony of Jesus. We can carry a testimony of Satan. We can carry a testimony of what man says. We can carry, the testimony is a relay of like where you've been, where you are, where you're headed, right? This is what God has done. This is where I'm at, and this is where I'm headed right now. And for many of us, our story, our testimony has been infected. But you can't fix this in legalism. You can't fix it with some kind of pressure. So to answer your question, that's the goal. The goal is I want to talk about it and be like, yeah, I worked through the need for justice, and at times felt like they need to get theirs. And I realized that's not going to heal. That's just resentment fueled. It's just toxicity in me. I got to let that go. I got to tell my story a few times, feel better. And then I learned the hard way that when I told my story, I didn't feel better.
Never did. Because you're like, well, if I tell this one detail, they'll really get it. It's like, no.
A lot of times you feel like that, ugh.
Yeah, it's yucky pecky, yucky,
right?
Yucky,
right?
Ugh.
So if you can, funnel that towards productive arenas where someone outside of even outside your geographic, like you can video call with professionals or people that are highly trained, and that don't have anything to do with your geographic area or your, So I feel like what you said is, and I rejoice because there are areas of my life, many of them, that were really difficult, and I can talk about them. Mm-hmm. There's still some that, you still work through. Like, you ever have those moments where you have those memories that come up? You haven't thought about them for a long time, and you just get that, like, that feeling of shame or embarrassment or
yes, indeedy,
criticism. Mm-hmm. That gives me another opportunity to just practice kindness in that moment, to shift the focus so that I can look at every story of my life with graciousness and kindness. Because if I'm doing that in my inner world, then I'll give that to you. We have trained a church culture historically. Give grace to others. Give grace to others.
Ignore yourself.
Ignore yourself. And it was in performance. Mm-hmm. Oh, God bless you, child. The Lord loves you. We didn't really mean it, but we just said it because it's the right thing to say. And we weren't cultivating it within us. And it leads to inauthentic, environments that then we realize, wow, we don't carry that within ourselves. So we've been on a journey of that, and God's healing and continuing to heal. And I know many of you, you've had traumas, and sorry, I hit the wrong slide. You've had traumas and things in your life that you've gone through, and there's things that it's going to take some time. I think that where we'd recommend, there's a bunch of resources that come to mind if you really tune into that exposing the rejection mindset. That's really going to be a great place. But a lot of things we talked about really land into the God loves me and I love myself territory, where you're going to need to learn the journey as I have, where I remember the day and season and time where I was so frustrated and where I was at and where things were happening in my healing process and what I was trying to move into. And I really saw God brought attention to the reality that when times got tough, I was really hard on myself. And I want to release you from that. I want to release you from that being hard on yourself, because it was a gift of freedom in my life. I also talk about that in the Heart Healing Journey. There's 3 chapters that really get into that: acceptance, patience, kindness. It's right in the middle of the book. You can skip to it if you want. The Heart Healing Journey is a book you can kind of skip around from subject to subject, whatever sticks out at you. I designed it that way. But we just pray that what we're sharing in our journey is a help to your life. If you feel like you have some questions you'd like to have addressed, send it to Mark at markdejesus.com. So MARK at MARKDEJESUS.com. And send it with something in the subject of questions for podcasts. Try to write it in a way that we can just read it on the show, that we don't have to edit it, because we want to respect, your privacy. Write it in a way that it can be read over in a show, and we can present it, and we'll keep you posted. The plan is 2 weeks from now to do questions. So we're going to give some time for the questions to collect, and we'll do at least a couple episodes on that. And we're looking forward to that. Anything else you want to say before we go?
I think we're good.
I think we're good too.
Mm-hmm.
I think we solved all your problems.
We did.
Anyways, thank you so much, everyone. I keep hitting that slide. Maybe that's because people need to see that video and watch that. Again, go to markdesus.com. Check it out. We'll look forward to seeing you in future episodes. God bless you guys.
Thank you, everyone.